What chance did a German woman have in an enemy prison camp where even the rules were written by men who saw her as both enemy and female? The answer, as history coldly reveals, was almost none. These captured German women found themselves in a nightmare where two strikes stood against them. They had served Hitler's war machine, and they had done so as women, breaking the rules of what society thought women should do. As Nazi Germany sent armies across Europe, thousands of German women went too. The Nazis didn't allow them to carry guns, but they helped the war in other ways. Some fixed wounded soldiers as nurses. Others sent radio messages telling planes where to drop bombs. Many typed secret papers or drew maps for officers. They wore gray uniforms with the eagle and swastika, Nazi Germany's symbol, on their chest. They believed they served their country with honor. None imagined what would happen if they were caught by the enemy. By 1944, the tide of war had turned against Germany. In Russia, in Africa, in Italy, German forces were losing ground. And as they retreated, sometimes these women couldn't escape in time. They became prisoners of war. The fate of these women depended greatly on who captured them. If Soviet soldiers found them, they faced one kind of horror. If American or British troops took them prisoner, they faced another, one that history textbooks conveniently forget to mention. While Soviet brutality is well documented, you'll soon discover the disturbing truth about Western Allied camps where some women endured violations that haunt them decades later. These liberators maintained a carefully crafted public image, but behind closed doors, power corrupted even those who claimed moral superiority. Nowhere were these women truly safe. And as our story continues, you'll learn how the Allies' treatment of female German prisoners forces us to question the simple good guys versus bad guys narrative we've been taught about World War II. In the frozen fields near Leningrad, Helga Schmidt and 12 other German nurses were captured when Soviet tanks surrounded their field hospital. The Russian soldiers were shocked to find women in German military uniforms. "Look, female fascists," one shouted, using a word for Nazis. These Soviet men had seen their own villages burned by German forces. Many had lost families to Hitler's armies. Their anger was deep, and these women wearing enemy uniforms seemed perfect targets for revenge. Within hours, the women were loaded onto trucks. Their warm coats and boots were taken. They rode for 3 days in open vehicles as the winter wind cut through their thin clothes. The temperature dropped to 40 degrees below zero at night. 2 women died of cold before they reached the first camp. This was just the beginning of their ordeal. The camp near Sverdlovsk held 2,400 German women prisoners behind rows of barbed wire fences and watchtowers with machine guns. They slept in long wooden buildings with no heat except small stoves that burned out by midnight. Each woman had one thin blanket. Their beds were wooden platforms where they slept pressed against each other for warmth. Food came once a day, a bowl of watery soup with cabbage and maybe a small potato, plus 200 grams of black bread so hard it could break teeth. This gave them only 700 calories daily, just 1/3 of what an adult needs to live. Many lost half of their body weight in the first months. Their bodies burnt up their own muscles just to stay alive. "We work or we die," wrote Ilse Müller in a diary she kept hidden in her shoe. 14 hours each day in the uranium mines. No masks, no gloves. Our hair falls out. Our gums bleed. 6 women from my group died last week. Their bodies were left in the snow until spring thaw allows burial. In Western Allied prison camps, German women faced different but equally shocking realities. When American forces captured a group of female signals operators in Tunisia, they sent them to Camp 17 in Algeria. Here, the women received better food, 2,100 calories daily, including bread, meat twice weekly, and even occasional chocolate. But their treatment wasn't always what official rules promised. At these camps, interrogation became a special kind of torture. They use our fear in ways men wouldn't understand, one woman later testified. They tell us what will happen if we're sent to the Russians instead, how we'll be handled there. The threat of transfer to Soviet custody broke many women's resistance without a single blow being struck. Some camps had worse secrets that wouldn't come to light for decades, treatment that would shock even hardened soldiers. But those stories would be buried deep after the war ended, hidden by governments on all sides who preferred simpler versions of victory. With their bare hands. The work never stopped, even in the worst weather. But something strange happened as these women struggled to survive. They began to see things that shocked them, things that went against everything they had been told about the Soviet Union. In one camp near Moscow, German women prisoners worked in a massive factory that made T-34 tanks, the same Russian tanks that had defeated German forces at Kursk. The factory was huge, modern, and efficient. Each week, it produced 50 tanks, more than entire German factories made in a month by 1944. Ilse Müller, who had worked as a signals operator for the German army, wrote in her smuggle diary, "Today, I watch 50 tanks roll out from the factory where we make parts, each one better than the last." Goebbels told us Russians were primitive, barely human, yet here they build war machines that crushed our armies. How could we have believed we would win against this? The German women saw other surprising things too. Many Soviet camps were run by women, female commanders, engineers, and doctors who gave orders and made decisions. This shocked the German prisoners who came from a Nazi system where women were told their place was in the kitchen or the nursery. Here were Russian women with real power, something few German women had been allowed under Hitler. The camp doctor is a woman my age, maybe 30, wrote Erika Hoffman. She studied at Moscow University. When I told her I wanted to be a doctor too, but wasn't permitted, she looked at me with pity and said, "In Russia, women have been doctors for decades. Your Germany sounds primitive, not us." But life in Soviet camps held darker horrors too. As the war turned more clearly against Germany, some camp guards took their revenge in ways that left lasting scars. Nights became a time of terror in many camps. Selected women would be taken from barracks for special questioning. What happened in those rooms has remained mostly unspoken for decades. Too painful for survivors to share, too shameful for official histories to record. The pretty ones disappeared first, one survivor had said to researchers in the 1990s, breaking 50 years of silence. Some came back changed, empty-eyed. Others never returned at all. We learned to make ourselves look dirty, to hide any beauty that remains after months of starvation. In some camps, women faced an impossible choice: submit to certain guards or be sent to the deadliest work assignments where few survived more than weeks. Their bodies, once their own, became another front in a war that showed no mercy to those caught in its machinery. Not all Soviet camps were the same. Some had commanders who followed rules and prevented the worst abuses. Others operated like private kingdoms where anything could happen behind closed doors. The women learned quickly which camps to fear most. Knowledge passed in whispers between prisoners being transferred. As 1944 turned to 1945, conditions in many camps grew worse. German armies were retreating on all fronts. German Hitler's promised victory had turned to certain defeat. News of Russian advances reached the camps, bringing a new wave of fear to the German women prisoners. Many worried what would happen when the war finally ended. Would they ever be allowed to go home? Or would vengeance keep them in these frozen camps forever? In Western Allied camps, German women faced different discoveries. Those held by American and British forces found themselves in places with surprising comforts. at least compared to Soviet camps. At Camp 222 near Southampton, England, 800 German women prisoners received daily meals that added up to 2,100 calories, 3 times what their countrywomen in Russian camps got. They had weekly meat, milk, and even occasional chocolate from American supplies. Erica Weinman, who had been a nurse with the German army, wrote in a letter later found in military archives, "The Americans throw away food we would have treasured in Berlin. Yesterday, I watched a guard toss half a sandwich into the trash. In Germany, people would fight over those scraps." This abundance shocked women who had been told that Britain and America were starving under German U-boat attacks. How could these enemies have so much when Germany had so little? The question planted seeds of doubt about other Nazi claims. But Western Allied camps had their own dark sides too. The comfortable barracks and better food hid other dangers that would remain mostly hidden in official reports. While Soviet camps used open brutality, Western camp systems sometimes used more hidden methods of control. Methods that left no visible marks but caused lasting damage. The German women in these camps were caught between worlds, no longer protected by their country, not yet ready to admit Germany's defeat, and facing dangers from all sides. What they discovered in these places would change them forever, forcing them to question everything they once believed about the war, their country, and even themselves. And for many, unfortunately, the worst revelations were yet to come. Taught to hate sometimes showed humanity through decent food and medical care. Yet this same enemy could exploit, manipulate, and violate with impunity. This contradiction shattered their worldview more thoroughly than simple cruelty might have. Education programs in Western camps took on a different meaning in this context. German women attended mandatory classes on democracy, read previously banned books, and learned about concepts like equal rights. Yet, these lessons in freedom occurred within a system where they had none. The hypocrisy wasn't lost on the prisoners, who recognized the gap between Allied ideals and actual practices. By the war's end, the German women in Western captivity had undergone a complex transformation. Their understanding of good and evil had been completely upended. The Nazi regime they had served had committed unimaginable horrors, yet their liberators had shown that power corrupts regardless of which flag it serves. This uncomfortable truth that no side held a monopoly on virtue or vice would remain largely unacknowledged in post-war narratives that preferred simpler stories of heroes and villains. The experiences of these women challenge our sanitized understanding of World War II. Their testimony reveals that victorious nations, while stopping Nazi atrocities, often failed to uphold the very principles of human dignity they claimed to be fighting for. This more complex history reminds us that war corrodes moral boundaries on all sides, and the full truth includes chapters that no nation eagerly adds to its official story. Before, I said no one wanted to know, and after a while, I didn't want to remember. The story of German women prisoners forces us to think hard about war, about how we remember history, and about whose suffering gets remembered. These women had been part of a terrible system that caused great harm. Some had supported Nazi ideas willingly. Others had just followed orders. All found themselves facing harsh consequences when that system collapsed. Their legacy lives in the questions they raise. How does gender shape what happens to people in war?